so he loved that, right? Loved the article. So I ended up doing some writing for them, and then he said, we're thinking of starting a sci-fi magazine here at LFP. Is that something you'd be interested in? And I said, sounds great. So we sort of pitched the executives, and they wanted to do it. And so I ended up doing, it's sort of funny. I was doing the sci-fi universe for Larry Flint, and he's from this, sort of adult magazine guy, but he had a whole bunch of consumer magazines from mainstream because he had a pipeline of distribution he had to fill. So I did Sci-Fi Universe for them, and occasionally we get called to these meetings, and they were just bizarre meetings. They were really for art.
Christopher? I think we're having technical difficulties. Hold on.
Recording in progress.
She's back.
Okay. You were at Sci-Fi Universe and
Not really, it'll call her. And so I ended up doing Sci-Fi Universe for many years, and that was a lot of fun. And that directly kind of led into, my first movie. In fact, it was a thinly veiled version of Sci-Fi Universe called Geek and Free Enterprise, and then many years later, I ended up actually doing that magazine as well.
So tell me about Free Enterprise. What was it like directing and writing?
Well, Free Enterprise, I wrote produced. It was directed by Art Burnett. It was a really remarkable story because, we didn't know what we didn't know at the time. So I'd written the script kind of on spec, based somewhat as a Vermont clap about things that were happening in our lives at the time. All this Laserdisc shopping, Toys R Us shopping, going to bars and all this stuff. It was kind of like a sci-fi swingers, as people said, or played against Sam. It was my favorite year. So wrote this thing, but it all hinged on William Shatner being involved, and of course we didn't have William Shatner. We knew nothing about this project. It was pretty naive of us, but everybody said, "Oh, Bill Shatner has written such a perfect character, such a perfect guy. How could he not want to do this? It's so flattering." Well, Shatner did want to do it. I remember we got a call. We're 3 weeks or 4 weeks away from shooting, and our assistant says, William Shatner's on the phone. We're like, what? So we go to answer the call, and goes, hello, this is William Shatner. And we're like, oh my God, it really is him. And he goes, so I see you raised the money to do this movie, and you want me for it. Well, I'm not doing the film. And we were like crestfallen, and we're like, oh my God, well, why is he calling us to tell us he's not doing it? So we figured there got to be something else going on here. And he goes, we said, well, is there anything we could do to convince you to do this film? And he's like, no. And then the classic Shatner pause. He goes, well, maybe there's one thing. We're like, oh, what's that? He goes, well, look, you wrote me as a gone guru. I'm a screwed up guy. Maybe you wrote me as a screwed up guy instead of a guy who had all the answers. That's something I'd be interested in. And we're like, well, what kind of problems does William Shatner have? And he goes, girls. And it was very funny. So we started talking, going back and forth, and he'd be like, call me Bill. And we're like, Bill this, Bill that. Coming up with all these great ideas, he has great ideas, we have great ideas. It was just great. About 20 minutes later, he says, okay, well, I'm not saying I'm going to do your movie. In fact, I'm probably not, but I'll look at another script. And oh, that's great. That's great. That's great, Bill. Because now you call him Mr. Shatner. And say, oh, it's great, Mr. Shatner. And so we wrote it, we read it, sent it to him, and he loved it, and ended up doing the movie. So it was a remarkable experience. Not only that, working with Shatner shooting the movie, he was just, fantastic. We ended up all going to camp together. Of course, he was on the Concorde, and I think we were on Steerage on a wing of some plane somewhere, and gave his outfits for the movie to Planet Hollywood. So the whole thing was, was exactly the kind of dream experience you want for your first movie. Up until when it was released in theaters, and it was a small independent company that released it, didn't promote it the way we hoped, and obviously was a huge hit, but then became a big success on home video.
What did it lead to? I've got something like the House of the Dead series I'd love to hear about.
I was very lucky because we won a bunch of film festivals, and then it opened in theaters, and that led to doing other films. And after that, I produced a film called The Specials that James Gunn had written, who went on to do Guardians of the Galaxy, and did a couple of. Ended up buying Cinefantastic after the publisher died, and we did a couple of movies under the aegis of the CFQ brand. And then I started writing on the wall for films and moved into TV, and so I was working on shows like Castle and Necessary Roughness and The Librarians, and obviously most recently having run Pandora for the CW, so that was obviously it was a good time to move from features to television because the environment had changed so drastically.
Please tell me about how you got involved with the Librarians. And Dean Devlin, maybe?
The Librarians, that seems particularly apropos. I thought you were going to ask me about, my grandfather being from a house client, but okay, let's talk about the Librarians. So Librarians was really interesting. I had been on a show called Agent X for TNT, which is about this secret agent that worked for the vice president, I don't want to secret, which is a really wonderful show. Jeff Efner, Sharon Stone, James Earl Jones. Really, yes. And it was, I loved that show, but unfortunately, at the time, TNT was changing, and a new president who hadn't greenlit the show, and so he had no interest in it. And even though the ratings were pretty good, they didn't renew it. It was a shame. That show could have gone for years and years and years. And it was like writing an American James Bond, so it was writing on the wheelhouse. I absolutely loved it. But at the time, we met a line producer who was on that show. This guy Paul Bernard, who and part of the problem with that was that it was an expensive show, but not expensive enough. And a lot of people had no experience in writing for budget. And I think one of the things he loved about working with us is we always knew how to cut and to edit and to make things work and come in on budget. And so he loved that about us. And the thing about Librarians is Librarians was not an expensive show. And I was already really good friends with Dean, and we never worked together before. But I'd known him for a long time. We'd always talked about working together. And, Dean was taking over the show from John Rogers to showrun it. It was his first time showrunning, and he needed a strong number two to sort of run the day to day. And Paul was like, "Oh my God, these guys on Agent X are fantastic, and it looks like the show's getting canceled." And Dean was like, "Oh my God, Mark's a good friend of mine. That's amazing." And so Dean said, "Do you want to come do the Librarians?" And it was really funny because that day that I said yes, the next day I had breakfast with Brian Fuller, and he said, "Do you want to?" Because when Brian was on Discovery, he said, "Do you want to come and do Star Trek?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, I just said I'd do the Librarians, but
It's Star Trek.
I said, look, I can't not do Librarians because Dean's a friend that I said I'd do it. I said, but down the line, when this is done, but by then he was gone. So I ended up going to Librarians, and that was just a fantastic year. It was a great year working with Dean, and we had a great time doing it. Obviously, became really good friends. Although I had already been friends with John Kim because we'd all gone to New York Comic-Con together. I was going for Agent X, and Dean and John were going for Librarians. And Dean had said to me, he said, "Well, why don't you come on the plane with me instead of flying, there yourself?" And so I ended up going on Dean's plane that's where I met him, going to New York Comic-Con. We became fast friends, and so working with him on Librarians was great. And that's why when we did Pandora, I'm like, "John, you've got to come and do a couple episodes of Pandora." But they showed up in Portland, Librarians, and it was just such a great group of people, and we had so much fun, and it's such a delightful show, and has just the greatest fandom. The Librarian fans are just the best. They're so loyal and dedicated. They just love it, and it was just a really wonderful experience because everybody was so happy to be there, so excited about the show, and such a great concept, and of course. That wonderful cast with Rebecca and especially Christian, and then, we had great guest stars. One of the episodes that Steve and I did was the Carnival episode, Tears of the Clown, and it just worked out that we got the most amazing guest stars. We got Felicia Day for that one and Sean Astin. And so we ended up, we're all up in Portland, and none of us had really spent much time up there. So we all spent a lot of time. Oh, and John Frakes was directing that one, who I'd known for years also, and he was the greatest guy in the world. And so we ended up going, we went to this place called Ground Control, which is this amazing video arcade in Portland. And so it was me and Steve, the other writer, and Sean Astin and Felicia Day. And so we're playing all these games and having the greatest time. And we called Frakes and we're like, Frakes, there's a Star Trek The Next Generation pinball machine. You gotta come down here. I'm not coming down there. And he's like, fine. And then there was this Lord of the Rings pinball machine. So they all freaked out that Sean Astin was there. So they had him autograph the pinball machine, which was so funny. And I just remember scouting for that. We had to find an amusement park to shoot that. And it was great because, people talk about how great John is, John Frakes, and he's like, we're in the middle of a scout, which is usually very serious and just, work and things. And he sees the bumper cars. So let's go on the bumper cars. And he got the whole scout to go on the bumper cars. And it was hysterical. It's like he was on the, he's about to crash into another bumper car. And I'm like, roll it! But it was a terrific time, and that whole experience, and obviously working with Dean, who's just, one of the nicest people in Hollywood, and does such great shows. I'm so happy for him, between The Return of Leverage, and now, also with Almost Paradise, and they have a new show coming up called The Ark on Sci-Fi, so he's just on fire these days, which is fantastic.
Can you tell us about Pandora and how that came about?
Yeah, that was an interesting experience because it was funny. For a guy who's really a big sci-fi fan, most of my career had been like writing procedurals and sort of dramas, and I did, work on essay roughness, which is like sports and therapy, which is as far away from me as you could possibly get.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it was interesting. I really wanted to do a space show. And I thought I missed my window, and I kind of wrote Pandora on a lark when I had some downtime, and CW was looking for summer shows, and we pitched them, and they said they were really interested, but then nothing happened for a while, and all of a sudden it was like February, and it happened really quickly, but they wanted it on the air in July, which was crazy. Yeah. So when we closed our deal, we had to build our sets and cast and shoot like in 2 months in order to have the episodes be able to air in June. So we had this really accelerated pre-production. It was insane, and we ended up shooting in Sofia in Europe because we needed somewhere to build the sets quick enough, and also it was a huge budget, so that affected where we could shoot. And it ended up being a really terrific experience. I love doing that show. It was very hard to do a low-budget science fiction show set in space and in the future. Very challenging, but that was part of the fun for me because I like to figure out, as a producer, I like to figure out the puzzles. And I would prefer to have more money, but if I work with what I have. And then we sort of cracked the code the second season because we had a little bit more time to prep, and it all looked like it was going great, and then COVID hit. So I was there prepping for about 4 days before they started closing aviation. And I had to come back to the States, and we stopped crafting. Immediately had gotten COVID, I guess, while I don't think it was when I was in Bulgaria. When I came back, they had, at LAX, instead of they just put everybody together, right next to each other, to check to see if people had temperature. It was a disaster. I mean, it was you could tell that, it was just, there was no way I was going to avoid it, and sure enough, I got it. And if I didn't have it before I got to LAX, I definitely got it at LAX. So I had COVID for a while, which really sucked. And it was very early before people knew much about it, and there were no vaccines or anything like that at the time, and no treatments. So I ended up, we were sitting around, and then finally, basically CW had no shows, and is there any way you guys can get back into production? And we kind of figured out our COVID mitigation plan and how we would do it. It was one of the first shows to be back up and shooting, and but it was difficult because we had less money because nobody gives you extra money for COVID mitigation. It just comes out of your budget. And all these things, all these great guest stars that I wanted to have, I couldn't bring because it was hard to travel people. Either you couldn't get them into the country, get a flight, or you couldn't get them to come because they didn't want to travel. I mean, we had amazing people lined up, and then people said, "Oh, how come Charisma didn't come back as your mother?" And it was like, I'm like, she really wanted to. And we had all these great plans. And we love Charisma from Buffy, and she just didn't want to travel during COVID. And then we had another really huge sci-fi actor that we wanted, and she hadn't worked in years by her own design. She loved the show and she wanted to do it. And then it was this kind of same thing. She had young kids and she didn't want to leave during COVID in case she got stuck, in Europe. And I had this big thing where I wanted to bring in all these other actors. It was like the first season we had like Aaron Gray from Park Rogers do an episode, and Mary Diablo from Living Daylights, and we had a bunch of really cool Jeffrey Combs and all these people. And I wanted to do the same thing, but even bigger the second season. And then also because of COVID, I was really limited in terms of who I could travel. It's like, can you cast the whole thing out of Bulgaria? I'm like, no, I can't do that. So I was like, but I ended up getting a bunch of dudes from the UK, and even that was, tough. And but I couldn't really bring in anybody from the US who wasn't a regular. So it was very hard producing during the pandemic, which obviously people had bigger problems than that, but that was my challenge. And but I think we ended up doing a great season, and I was really happy with it despite the limitations. So I was really looking forward to the third season, and that's still a very actually distinct possibility that that's going to happen. It's just because it's an independent show, and it's done really well around the world. But then we had a terrible time slot on when we came back, and it was just the worst. Nobody was watching TV. We're against like the Super Bowl and against all these huge. It was not good. But
so there is hope for season 3.
Yeah, there is.
Good.
I mean, so often I'm on these calls, and where it's like, okay, we need to talk to this person about it. We need to talk to this person about it, because that's really the advantage of it not being an expensive show helps. If this was like $15 million an episode, it'd be over. But because the show is so, I don't know if expensive is the right word, but because it's low budget, it's much easier for people to come in and with less of an investment. And it's hard to get a sci-fi franchise that's been on network for 2 years. So there has been a lot of interest, and like I said, they have been doing the Dog and Pony show now. And I'd say there's a good chance it comes back, but I'm working on another show now that I'm very excited about. So I'd like to, hopefully I can do both, and then we'll just figure out.
What might that be? Is that a secret?
I gotta come and sit in Asheville. I was once a guest at a film festival. No, I was a guest at the Asheville Film Festival or something. And that was when they were really pushing their studios there. They had built that. And I said, I got to shoot in North Carolina. That would really be great. So maybe one day.
It's a beautiful location in North Carolina. So tell me about your Star Trek connection. You wrote comic books for Malibu Comics, and you've written several.
Star Trek. Star Trek thing goes way back. I mean, obviously, I did, very early in my career, when I was writing about the show, I was approached by Malibu to do a bunch of their Deep Space Nine comics, which I did, which was the first time I did comics, and that was really fun. I'm very proud of it, actually, many years ago for this book. I remember Deep Space Nine number 0, which was loosely based on the Fountainhead. It was still one of my favorite things I ever did. And then it was great because DC approached me to do an original series comic, which to me was like the coolest thing, because like as a 10-year-old, I went on a tour of Warner Communications, DC Comics, and I remember, getting this tour in like middle school and thinking, God, one day I'm going to write a comic for DC Comics. So when I did that and got the check, and the check stuff that said DC, I kept that because I thought it was so cool. So that was really fun. And then obviously, being a big Star Trek fan, it's always been a thing. And for the 50th, a little before the 50th anniversary, Ed Gross, who I've done a lot of writing with in the past, comes to me and says, Mark, the 50th anniversary of Star Trek's coming up, and we should do a book together, another book. And I'm like, I don't want to write a book about Star Trek. done that kind of, and don't really want to do it. There's nothing left to say. And he was like really disappointed. So it's the 50th anniversary, we got to do something. And then I think he was lucky. I read a book just around that time called I Want My MTV. It was an oral history of MTV. And then I read an oral history of Sarah Line, and they're both great. And that was live from New York. And I called him up and I said, listen, I know I said I wasn't interested, but I said, if we could do oral history of Star Trek, and our agent can sell it for enough money that it's worth my while, I said, I would consider it. And so we called our agent and said, oh my God, this is fantastic, great. I said, well, look, I'm not saying I'm going to do it, but let's see if you can get an agent. So she sold it in like a day, and then all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, I'm writing this book. So Ed was really excited. I wasn't sure how I felt, but then I started to really get into it. And so we write this book, and it's this huge manuscript. We call up our editor, who was very indulgent of us, and said, hey, Brandon, we got good news. We're sending the manuscript on Monday. But here's the bad news. It's really long, and we don't think you should cut it. We think it should be 2 books, because it's so enormous, and we don't think there's any fact. We don't think there's anything you can lose. So it's not huge just for that. So he called us on Monday and sent us an email, and all it said was, it's 2 books now. So that was like great validation. So they ended up releasing, it was a 50-year mission through Star Trek 6, which was the plan, I guess in the summer, and then a couple months later, the sequel, 50-year mission Volume 2, which was Next Generation through the Kelvin movies. So that was great, because those books were incredibly successful. And it led to a run of books that we did after that, where we did a book about, we did a 2-book deal. So we did Slayers and Vampires on Buffy, which is a good book. Then we did So Say It All on Galactica, which is a great book.
Yes.
It's the first half is all about the original series and Galactica 1980, and then the second half is all about the new series, the Ron Moore series. And the best compliment I ever got, I was moderating a Q&A at New York Comic Con with Ron Moore, and he just got the book. And I said, I think, what do you think? He says, I got the best compliment from you I can imagine. He says, first I started reading it just to read my quotes. I just read the stuff. And he said, that was really good. So I read all the stuff on my show. And he said, I love that so much. I went back and read all the stuff on the original show. And I had to read the whole book. So he said, I love it. And I said, oh, well, that is quite a compliment. And I was very proud of it, because the Galactica 1980 was originally the first pass I did on it. I read it and I thought, this is fine, but this is the last time anybody's ever going to write about this terrible show. Yeah. I said, we got to make this definitive. We got to make this the ultimate chapter ever written on Galactica. So I went back and did all these new interviews. And it's not like me to be that relentless, but I just went and did a bunch more interviews. I totally rewrote the chapter, and now it's like one of my favorite things in any of our books. It's just a hoot. And I said, even if people don't care about the show or don't know the show, it's so bizarre, that whole story, and there's such great interviews and so many wonderful people that we talked to. So I was really happy with that book. And then after we did So Say We All, we did this massive oral history of James Bond, which I also love. And I'm thinking about this. I don't know how we did all this, because I'm like listening to books. I'm like, oh my God. Because then the year after we did Secrets of the Force, which was the start.
Just say that.
Which came out last summer. This summer was They Should Have Killed His Dog, the oral history of John Wick and Kung Fu. That came out a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, a couple of weeks ago. Tell me about that one.
Well, it's funny, because that was the first book we didn't pitch them. They came to us and said, would you guys be interested in doing John Wick? We think that people would be interested. And I didn't kind of finish the book. I said, this is my last one, I'm done. It's like I'm very busy with TV, and these are a lot of work, and I love working with Ed, but I'm always like, this is my last one. So they said, okay, but John, and I'm like, I really love John Wick, but I don't know if there's a story there. And then I want to expand it to include Kung Fu and how that evolved to John Wick. And I started thinking about it, and I'm like, okay, but I wasn't sure. And then we started doing the interviews. I'm like, oh, this is a great story. This is really interesting. And then I got really into the book. Plus, this is the first book we really wrote during the pandemic, so instead of me doing interviews in person, which is my thing, I would like to sit down with people over lunch or whatever, and I started doing it by Zoom, which made it a lot easier.
Yeah.
And it was, so that was a good experience. And then we went to Comic-Con, and we had a panel against Keanu. I'm like, no one is going to come to this panel. It was going to be a disaster. And it was packed. Our panel was absolutely packed. And then we did a signing, and St. Martin sold out of every book they brought. They said, we should have brought more books. We sold out every book. And I'm like, okay, well, that's good. So from what I can see anecdotally, it seems to be doing really well. Because, you don't write these books for yourself. You write them hoping people will buy them and enjoy them. So I'm very happy with the way it turned out. And it seems to be doing very well. So, but I may be my swan song. I don't know.
I doubt it. So tell me about your Inglorious Experts podcast. How did that come about?
Yeah, I guess, boy, it's been almost 4 years now. I don't know, we were doing a podcast called The 4:30 Movie, which is based on, it was inspired, well, originally it was a generic movie podcast. We did a pilot, and I just felt there was something that wasn't working. And then I was thinking back to the whole 4:30 Movie when I was a kid on Channel 7 in New York, and they would just show movies, and, we'd see whatever was on. That's how we got exposed to so many different movies, because you didn't have VCR, you didn't have streaming, so like whatever was on the 4:30 Movie is what you watched, and that's how you got to see all these different kinds of movies. So, I came up with the idea that we would program, and then it's basically like Planet of the Apes Week, or, Monster Week, or, Elvis Week, or whatever. I said, let's do that, but as a podcast where we pick these movies. And it became very popular, and people, really enjoy it, and it's a great group of hosts, all people in the industry, and, all compliment each other. So I said, well, now that this is working, why don't we try and do a Star Trek podcast? Because obviously we're well known in the Star Trek community, and we could have some fun, and we, have a lot of great relationships, we could get great guests, and so we did it, and that has just gone way beyond my expectations. It is hugely popular. We get an insane amount of downloads every week, and people just love it. Every time I threaten to leave, it's like a revolt. I'm like, okay, we're going into our 5th year now, and I said, it's a 5-year mission. I'm done. Darren can keep going, because Darren is the visual effects supervisor on the Star Trek Next Motion Picture Directors Edition, and he's a concept designer in Hollywood, and he's done a lot of really cool stuff. And I said, what Darren does after that is up to him. But I said, I'm done at the end of 5 years. It's my 5-year mission. So I'm going into my 5th year, so we'll see what happens. But it has been actually really great, because obviously we're giving a lot. I can't tell you how many emails I've gotten from people, or from people like, I was in a hospital when my family member was dying during the pandemic, and the only thing that kept me from losing my mind was listening to your podcast. I couldn't even go into the hospital. I was listening to it in the car, and that was the thing that got me through. I'm just like, I understand actors or people on TV shows like this stuff. I got a little of that on Free Enterprise, how it changed people's lives and all that. But this was really, and I realized, wow, that was the last point where before that I had been thinking, okay, I'm kind of done with this, because it's very time consuming, and it's not something we do for money. So, but after hearing all this, I'm like, I got to keep doing this a little while longer, because obviously this means a lot to people, and we're doing, some good. And plus, from a selfish point of view, I've gotten to spend time and meet people who are really interesting, like Joe DeGusta is the casting director of the original series. Just amazing stories. I mean, to me, sometimes the non-Star Trek stories are the most interesting. He had these great stories about Irvin Allen, about Lucille Ball, we did another one where great Orson Welles stories from the guy who did the Star Trek motion picture advertising campaign, who just had wild stories about Orson Welles. Just so many interesting people that I wouldn't have spoken to. One of the people that continues to fascinate me, who we covered in 5th Year Mission, was this woman named Andre Kindred, who was the first African-American assistant at Desilu, Paramount, and she worked for Gene Kuhn, who was the number 2 on the original Star Trek, and she was friends with Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, and she's just remarkable. So she's also someone who I got to know more through the podcast and hear. So I'm as much as I'm a host, I'm also like a listener, and I really enjoy doing it. It's super fun. I think we've done really some great episodes, and we really made a point of focusing with that podcast on what we love, as opposed to, bashing. There's so much bashing.
Right.
And look, there's a lot out there I don't like, but I don't need to publicly, thrash on something that a lot of people do like. I mean, let them like it. Let them like what they like. I'm just going to talk about the stuff that I love and enjoy, and that's to me, and it comes out in the podcast. People get that we are absolutely passionate and love this stuff, and I think that's why people love to listen to it.
We do, and we've got 3 minutes left. So, do you have any advice for budding writers or producers or anything? Any advice at all for our budding artists?
Yeah, I mean, my advice is obviously just to be relentless and not to give up, and don't expect it to come easy. I mean, Nick Marner once famously said, "An overnight success in Hollywood is 10 years." And that's true. So you gotta take your time and work hard, and one of the things that we all did growing, whether it's internships and working for other people, even something as simple as like getting somebody coffee, which now people don't seem to really feel is worthwhile. I learned so much as an assistant, and I just, even paths we thought would not have led to where I am. I mean, I learned something from every job I've ever had, and I just think that you can't give up. You gotta believe. Like Ted Lasso says, you gotta believe.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mark Altman.
Thanks for having me.
Thank
It was
you.
a pleasure.
See you later.
Good luck with the convention.
Thank you. Goodbye.